What's up, guys? It's Q&A time. It is May 27th, 2018. Q&A thread was from earlier this week. I'm just now getting to it, so bear with me here. Open Q&A this week, a whole variety of questions. So, go ahead and get into it. What sweeteners do you prefer, and which ones would you avoid and why? Sucralose, aspartame, stevia, xylitol, sorbitol, etc. Also, update on your prep and current weight, etc. Well, I did that, so I won't update my prep here, but maybe I'll make a separate video. But that's on my Facebook from this week. As far as sweeteners go, from what's listed in here, there's quite a few differences. Some of these are sugar alcohols, which do have caloric content. Some of them are non-nutritive sweeteners, which don't have caloric content. So that's obviously the biggest difference. Aspartame, for example, or sucralose don't have caloric content. Stevia doesn't really have caloric content, just pure stevia. It's not really nutritive. I wouldn't consider it. Xylitol is a sugar alcohol. It does have caloric content, sorbitol, and there are others. So yeah, I mean, that would be the biggest difference between the two. If you're consuming exorbitant amount of sugar alcohols, then there is caloric content, and it can throw off your caloric deficit or caloric surplus, or whatever you're doing calorie wise. So that's something to keep in mind if you're consuming a lot of them. They also cause GI distress in excess. That amount really depends on the person. I mean, I've seen, half a pack of gum, which isn't a lot for some people, really mess up the stomach of other people. So, it really just depends on the person. You'll know if it does, and you'll want to back it down. Same thing with non-nutritive sweeteners. I mean, they can cause GI distress, especially in massive amounts if you're disrupting gut microbiome too much. So it really just depends on the person. Everyone reacts so differently. I know some people that consume a ton of them with no real adverse effects, and others that just can't. So my suggestion is, if you want to use them, consume the ones that work best for you, as far as make you feel best. Me personally, aspartame doesn't really seem to bother me. Stevia doesn't bother me. Sugar alcohols don't really bother me in a reasonable amount. I chew gum. I chew pretty much the same exact amount within one piece pretty much every single day. So I don't count it in my macros. It's pretty much counted in on its own. Aspartame, something like diet soda, doesn't really give me any issues. Same with sucralose. We know the upper limits of these in terms of safety is really, really high. So, that's typically not an issue. Stevia doesn't really bother me either, though a lot of people that consume stevia aren't really consuming pure stevia. They're consuming it with some kind of filler, whether it's dextrose or maltodextrin. Same with sucralose. If you're consuming Splenda, well, you're consuming sugar with the Splenda. That's the filler. So I suggest a lot of people use liquid sweeteners, or if you're going to consume something like stevia, use Truvia. It has erythritol in it, which is essentially no caloric value. I mean, there's 0.2 calories per gram, so it's pretty negligible. Has no impact on blood glucose or insulin levels, so that is a good option. Doesn't seem to bother people like some of the other sugar alcohols do. So really, I mean, I don't have a preference. Understanding caloric values and differences between them is really the biggest thing, and then taste, taste preference beyond that point. Okay. Context dependent, I assume, but would you rather use Clen or DMP? Well, that's definitely context dependent. I mean, there's situations where someone could utilize both if they do choose to use DMP and understand, the potential side effects. Same with clenbuterol. Really, there are plenty of side effects to it. It's going to depend on, one, I would say prep versus a non-prep situation. DNP is notorious for water retention, especially dose dependent, you know, higher dose, potentially a little bit more. In prep, it just makes it really hard to gauge progress, you know, until you drop it out. So if you're running it like a moderate dose for a longer period versus a higher dose for a shorter period, you just don't really know how you look exactly until you drop it. And some people drop a ton of water. So, you know, in that regard, it doesn't really seem like, from a visual standpoint, from an evaluation standpoint, it doesn't make sense. Though you could, I mean, you could use it. I mean, some people do, definitely. An off-season mini-cut situation, that might not be as, might not be a really big deal. Clen is definitely, depends on the tolerance of the person too. It has a very long active life, stays in your system very long. It is, can cause some cardiovascular discomfort for people, potential cardiovascular side effects, you know, so I don't think that abusing it's a good idea, or using it often. Lower to moderate doses for extended periods of time is not a terrible idea versus hammering it. Again, that's not going to cause water retention, so that, you know, visually that's a little bit easier to manage than the other in a prep situation, so that might be something to consider. DNP is a lot stronger in terms of actual BMR increase. So, you know, and really they could be used together. So that's not the question, but they certainly could be used together. So again, it's really just situational, what the person prefers, tolerates, visually what the goal is. Can they give themselves a fair evaluation if they're using the DNP? You know, so those are probably the main things that should be considered at that point, outside of obviously just understanding the side effects, managing those. Okay. Buzzwords in the health and fitness industry that are complete bullshit. Scare tactics. Oh my. Well, I'm trying to think. I'm blanking out here. So, like, I'm trying to think of some buzzwords. I mean, I don't know about scare tactics necessarily, but it's just a constant battle of this is good or this is bad, or now this is good when it used to be bad. You know, you should do keto, you should do high carbs and low fat, you should do paleo diet, you should do, you should be a vegan, you should whatever, you know. So it's just a lot of misinformation to general public that can't decipher between, you know, between the differences in these different nutritional approaches. And for most of these people, they just don't understand the basics of thermodynamics, you know, calories in, calories out, what actually makes, you know, from a mechanistic standpoint, how do we actually lose body fat? You know, how do we create a caloric deficit? You can't just eat a ketogenic diet and lose body fat because you're in ketosis, because you're still eating 1 million grams of fat. So, yeah, I mean, ads are clickbait, you know, shit's all over the place. Scare tactics, yeah, for sure. I mean, there's this will kill you, or this will kill you, or this will hurt you, or never do this. 5 things you shouldn't do that you didn't know about, or whatever. So, you know, I ignore pretty much all that stuff. I mean, I glance at it, I see it, but I mean, I really ignore most of it. It's just not the crowd that I appeal to. You know, if I like a family member or somebody that wants to talk to me outside of this industry, it's not really as educated, you know, I kind of just try to break it down into basics and let them know, hey, it's like, it can all work in the context of calorie control and deficit and surplus and training and cardio and blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. Peptopro, which is casein hydrolysate versus hydrolyzed whey versus basic whey isolate and a pre-post insulin protocol shake. Is Peptopro worth the extra money? Short answer is no. Somebody actually posted a study in here about the casein hydrolysate and hydrolyzed proteins, and the fact that they're actually could be considered inferior to an undigested protein. These are basically pre-digested to an extent. The gastric emptying is going to be really fast, so essentially you're just not absorbing them as well. That's kind of the take home from the study. So I don't know. I really don't think that it's worth the money. It's not something that I suggest to people. You know, if they do use a complete protein source during training, it's typically whey isolate, and that's more so just from the fact that they need to get more protein in their diet. That's a time where they can easily digest the protein, and they can you know, fit more calories into their diet because they're eating high calories, or they have digestive issues or whatever. So it's not necessarily that it's better or worse, because they probably still have amino acids in their bloodstream from the previous meal that they ate, or they can have EAAs when they train and all that. So I mean, even with an insulin, you don't need protein. I mean, you could, but you could use essential amino acids. I mean, really, you're just looking at carbohydrates matching up with the amount of insulin, or vice versa, you know, to manage blood glucose levels. So, no, it's not any better. Mainstream keto. Sorry, I'm focusing in and out. I think it's this light coming in, guys. Let me shut this blind real quick. Sweet. Probably saw my pajama pants on. Mr. Bubbles pajamas. I've had these for about 15 years, and they're stretched out and have holes in the ass, but they're my favorite. All right. Next one, mainstream keto. Solid advice on how to tell people it's not for everyone. It's really starting to grind my gears. Well, it's the same thing as the clickbait stuff I talked about above. I mean, people need to understand, just from the mechanistic standpoint, how we lose body fat, how calories in, calories out. Like I said, if they feel good on a ketogenic diet, if they feel good in ketosis and they function well, then that's fine. And there are different types of keto. There's, you know, like medical keto and a bodybuilder style ketosis. So I mean, there's really, it's fine for some people and it's great for some people, but it's not. People think that it's magic, and again, if they don't understand thermodynamics, then it's really just pointless at that point. I could take someone that has no regard for thermodynamics, and they're in ketosis and they eat a bunch of fat. You know, they're putting freaking 4 or 5 tablespoons of coconut oil on all their meals, and MCTs, and drinking butter and coffee all day long, and then someone that eats calorie deficit from whey isolate and Twinkies, that loses more body fat. Granted, they might end up with a nutrient deficiency, but, you know, I mean, they're still losing body fat. Okay. Last Q&A, you mentioned negatives of THC, but didn't really go into detail. Can you talk about the drawbacks to it and how big of a deal it can be? Okay. I think I just mentioned, I was just talking about CBD oil versus THC. So that's the context, because I was talking about CBD oil, somebody asked. I don't claim to be an expert on this. I've never used marijuana. I don't know. I'm not an expert on THC. I do know a decent amount about CBD oil. So, I mean, biggest difference between the two, they're both components of the same plant, essentially, but one's psychoactive, one's not. Anything that has a psychoactive effect like that has potential to be, I don't know how I want to state this. I don't want to say addictive, but, you know, you like the feeling of something, just like caffeine releases dopamine, you feel good. Tons of people are addicted to caffeine, tons. And the person asking this question will agree with me because we talked about it before. So, yeah, I mean, has that potential for you to want it more often. I mean, some people are definitely addicted. I think they just smoke pot every day because they feel good. And if you ask them, well, they're not. It's just pot, you know. It's not hurting them. But yeah, I mean, they're dependent on it to an extent. I mean, that could be a drawback, certainly. But it does have short-term, you know, some short-term drawbacks, like with the memory, with just cognitive function, reaction time, things like that. So, you know, if, for example, if marijuana is not legal in all states, obviously there's only a few states, I think, you really shouldn't drive high. I mean, it does slow your reaction time, much like alcohol. It's dangerous in that regard. You know, so I've seen mixed literature on whether it has long-term issues with memory. I've seen some things that actually say combating the side effects of Alzheimer's, and then other things that say it does potentially have long-term drawbacks in terms of memory, just because it's constantly pounding the same receptor all the time. And that would be similar to any other drug, you know, that constantly overloads a certain receptor to an extent that it shouldn't be. So that's debatable. But yeah, I mean, potential just psychological addiction because you like it, or you think you need it. Appetite, you know, if you don't want to get the munchies. I mean, one other thing, and when I was comparing the two, one thing that I do like to mention too is that CBD is not stimulatory. It's not psychoactive at all. So if you're worried about those things, then that's a good thing to use. It actually has potential for parasympathetic nervous system activation, whereas THC, on the other hand, can be stimulatory. From some people, can actually raise heart rate, cause, like, you know, anxiety. Some people it calms, some people it causes anxiety. Some people it's both, probably just dependent on dose. So, you know, if you're looking for relaxation, calming, parasympathetic activation, THC is probably not the best thing. CBD is probably better. So, I mean, in reality, CBD is kind of like THC in the fact that it has a lot of the benefits and not really many of the drawbacks. Though you could argue that the drawbacks aren't really that terrible in, you know, if used in moderation. So that's kind of my take on it. Again, I'm no expert on it. That's just kind of how I feel about it. I really don't care what people do. So, a couple more. Are you a Buckeyes fan? Yes, but probably not to what you expected. I don't give a shit about football or basketball or baseball or anything that most people care about. I actually am a huge college wrestling fan. I like international wrestling too. I follow all the international stuff, U.S., any country. So yeah, I love NCAA wrestling. Actually, that's probably one of Ohio State's best teams anyhow. They have been national champs within the last 4 or 5 years. They always compete heavily with Penn State, who is kind of the powerhouse. They're actually beating Penn State this year up until right at the end. Was really disappointing. But yeah, a really strong team. We have some extremely good wrestlers on the Ohio State team. I've went and watched them in Columbus several times. Always watch the matches on my computer and stuff. So, and follow all the guys that graduate. I watch them when they wrestle internationally in the Olympics and all that stuff afterwards. So yeah, I'm a huge college wrestling fan. Huge fan of the Buckeyes. So, and that sport anyhow. Thoughts on building muscle in a maintenance phase? You won't. You're not going to build muscle in a maintenance phase, probably. You know, you could argue maybe with some type of calorie cycling, you might have a chance to build muscle and burn fat at the same time. You're splitting hairs outside of situations where it's like super compensation or muscle memory, where someone had lost muscle and they're gaining muscle back while losing body fat. For most people, it's just not even something that they should consider. It's probably a waste of time. Okay. Last one. Been reverse dieting for 10 months. Current macros 300, 350, 70. I'm assuming that's 300 protein, 350 carbs, 70 fat on training days, 300, 370 on non-training days. Fasted blood glucose averages around 80. Ready for a mini cut. What would be a good starting point on macros? 57 years old, on TRT, and still have nice vascularity. Well, I would probably want to know why you want a mini cut. I'm not really sure. Is it like a couple photos attached. Yeah, I mean, you look like you're in good shape. Unless it's like you have a competition or a photo shoot or like a vacation or something. I mean, I don't know what the reasoning is, but you look good. I wouldn't mini cut. I would just keep going. I mean, blood glucose looks good. Body fat looks good. I don't really see any reason to mini cut, but I mean, if you wanted to, I mean, you're in a good spot. You could really pull from, I mean, you could really pull from anything at this point. Carbs or fat. You have carbs in on both days, a decent amount of carbs. You 300 on non-training days is a pretty decent amount. I assume that you probably do, that you probably metabolize glucose well and utilize glucose well, so you might want to pull from your fats a bit. You're on TRT, you could probably pull your fats down a little bit lower and not have to worry about the hormonal detriment there, as long as you know your lipids and all that stuff look good. So yeah, I mean, pull some fat out, maybe a little bit of carbs out, leave your protein as is. Wouldn't even necessarily have to add cardio in at this point. I mean, your blood glucose looks good, so you wouldn't necessarily have to pull carbs either. That's another reason. And even pulling the fats is still going to help with blood glucose anyhow. So yeah, so I mean, I guess, like I said, it would really just depend on why you want to do the mini cut in the first place. I mean, if I'm looking just at a glance, I wouldn't. I would just keep going. But, you know, I'm answering your question. So hope that helps. And that is it. Wait, no, one more. Two more. This was after I cut it off, but I'll go ahead and answer them. How to suppress Tren sides, mainly sleep problems. Okay, this is a real easy one. Most people don't even know this. Tren can heavily deplete serotonin, so that's one of the reasons that people get moody and that they can't sleep. Increased serotonin levels, probably going to combat a lot of the side effects. 5-HTP works good. 200 to 300 milligrams, maybe 400 if you really need it around bedtime. You could use 100 milligrams a couple times during the day if you need it. There you go. So that's pretty much it at that point. I mean, it's not a miracle. It could help, though. You know, it's going to help with serotonin. So serotonin levels. Best training approach for someone time limited but genetically makes progress with minimal effort. Okay. So if you're time limited, then, you know, pushing the volume variable is probably going to be a little bit harder. So mainly focusing on progressive overload. You know, as long as the person's not burning out their nervous system, then they could rely on the progressive overload component more so than the volume component. Or just even progressively overload and then do a lot of volume accumulation through quicker work, like supersets and giant sets and things that don't take a lot of time. So you could do both, but you could probably progressively overload primarily and make a pretty good amount of progress if the person's genetically gifted, as long as they're not getting injured or not, what was I saying, or not burning out their nervous system. So that would probably be where I would start. And then if they can't handle it, pull back on that a little bit and add in some of that quicker paced volume in there to take advantage of that variable. Okay, guys, that is it. We're about 23 minutes, so I will cut it here, and we'll talk to you guys again soon.